Before the video starts, I want to say happy birthday to Atzetzel Kanche 620. Thank you for following this channel to everyone, and I want to wish you the best birthday, full with luck and joy. Hey folks, before the video starts, I want to say big thank you for the feedback you gave me in the last video. Again, I will be short and say, as every other video, to leave a like and hit the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to comment down below, helping me to give proof to YouTube that all of you who follow this channel so far are real people who watch my videos. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy. I found a dark web forum dedicated to the Butcher, a serial killer who supposedly died in 1995. Last week, someone delivered a package to my door with his signature knife inside. Hey, so I don't usually post on Reddit, but this has been eating at me for the past week, and I just need to get it out there. Maybe someone can help me make sense of it. Or maybe you'll all just tell me I'm crazy. Either way, I feel like I'm in way over my head. It started about a month ago. I've always been fascinated with weird internet stuff. You know, like ARGs, creepy YouTube channels, and the deep web. Nothing too serious. I've never tried to buy drugs or hire a hitman or anything, but I've gone down rabbit holes where I've read about people who do. It's like a thrill, knowing there's this whole shadowy part of the internet that most people don't see. Anyway, I'd always been too scared to actually visit the deep web until a few weeks ago when I finally decided to give it a shot. I downloaded Tor, read up on the basics of staying anonymous, and just dove in. At first, it was kind of underwhelming. A lot of it is just scams and sketchy looking marketplaces. I wasn't planning on buying anything. I was just there to explore. But it was hard to shake the feeling that I didn't belong, like I was a tourist in someone else's world. Then I stumbled across something that stopped me in my tracks. It was a forum called the Red Room Chronicles. The name alone gave me goosebumps, and the description didn't help. A place for enthusiasts of the macabre. No poses, no cops. The landing page had this dark, minimalist design, just black with blood red text. Most of the threads were locked unless you had an account, but a few were visible to guests. One in particular caught my eye. It was titled, "The Butcher Lives." Now, if you don't know who the Butcher is, let me fill you in. He was this infamous serial killer in the early 90s who supposedly murdered 17 people. His thing was knives. Like every victim was dismembered with surgical precision, and he always left a single knife at the crime scene, blade sticking straight up as his signature. Creepy, right? But here's the thing, they never caught him. He disappeared in 1995, and a lot of people think he's dead. Others say he was just some messed up guy who wanted to scare people, and the murders weren't even connected. The thread was long, like hundreds of posts, but I couldn't stop reading. It was mostly speculation at first, people arguing over whether the Butcher was real or just some urban legend, but the deeper I went, the weirder it got. There were users claiming to have seen him recently, like within the past few months. One guy even posted blurry photos of what looked like a man in a hoodie standing in the middle of a forest. Another user shared a video clip of a knife being stuck into a wooden table, slowly and deliberately, while someone off camera whistled this creepy tune. It was low quality, but the timestamp on the video was from last week. That gave me chills. I don't know why I kept going, but something about the way people talked in that thread felt off. Like they weren't just talking about him. They were obsessed. One user in particular, with the handle Sharp Edge, kept posting these long, rambling replies about how the butcher was misunderstood, how his art wasn't about killing, but about sending a message. It was unsettling, but I chalked it up to internet weirdos being weird. Then I saw it. The link, hidden in the middle of one of Sharp Edge's posts, was a tiny hyperlink that just said, "Come closer." My stomach dropped. I knew clicking it was a bad idea, but by then, I was too deep. My hands were shaking as I hovered over it. Eventually, curiosity won out, and I clicked. The page that loaded was simple, just a black background with a single line of text. "Do you want to see the truth?" Underneath that was a button that said, "Yes." I hesitated for a long time. I even closed my laptop at one point, but the thought of that button kept eating at me. It's like it was daring me. So, against every ounce of common sense I had, I reopened the page and clicked yes. At first, nothing happened. Then my screen went black, and this distorted audio started playing. It sounded like someone breathing, slow and raspy. After a few seconds, white text appeared on the screen. "Welcome to the hunt." That's when I realized I had made a huge mistake. The moment the words "Welcome to the hunt" appeared on my screen, my heart started pounding. I don't know what I expected, maybe some kind of video or creepy sound effects, but the screen stayed black. Then more text appeared. "There are rules." I froze. Rules? For what? The breathing sound in the background got louder, more distorted, like whoever, or whatever, was on the other end of it was getting closer. I was about to slam my laptop shut when another line of text popped up. "Rule 1. Do not try to leave. We will know. I swear." I felt my blood turn to ice. My first instinct was to turn everything off, delete Tor, maybe even smash my laptop, just to feel safe. But the text kept coming, faster now. "Rule 2. Do not tell anyone. Not your friends, not the cops. No one." I sat there, my hands hovering over the keyboard, debating whether to just pull the plug, but it felt like the screen was holding me hostage. I couldn't look away. Rule 3. Complete the tasks. Failure will not be tolerated. The tasks? What tasks? I was starting to panic now. This wasn't fun anymore. It wasn't some spooky little internet game. It felt personal, like someone was watching me through the screen. My breathing was shallow, my palms sweating, and I realized I hadn't blinked in what felt like minutes. Finally, the last message appeared. "If you agree, type. I am ready." There was a little text box below it, waiting for my response. I stared at it, willing myself to close the tab, to just walk away. But my brain wouldn't cooperate. I was terrified, but I couldn't ignore the tiny voice in the back of my head whispering, "What if it's real? What if I didn't type the words and something happened anyway?" So I typed it. The second I hit enter, the screen went completely black again. The breathing sound stopped, and for a moment, I thought maybe it was over, but then my webcam light flicked on. You know that sinking feeling you get when you realize something's horribly wrong? Like when you've lost your wallet or left the stove on. Multiply that by 1,000. My stomach dropped so hard, I thought I was going to throw up. I scrambled to cover the camera with my thumb, but before I could, a new message popped up. "We see you." And then, just like that, the screen went back to normal. No breathing, no creepy text, just the same forum page where I'd started, like nothing had happened. For a few minutes, I just sat there, staring at my reflection in the black mirror of the screen. I felt like I'd stepped into some kind of trap, and now I was stuck. The logical part of my brain kept telling me it was just some elaborate prank, but deep down, I didn't believe that. I slammed my laptop shut and paced around my apartment, trying to calm down. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see someone standing outside. I live on the 3rd floor, so that's ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. About an hour later, my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was a text. No number. Just a string of random symbols where the contact name should have been. The message said, "Task 1, check your mailbox." My heart was pounding so loud, I could hear it in my ears. I told myself not to do it, that it was just some jerk trying to scare me. But the thought wouldn't leave me alone. What if there really was something in my mailbox? What if ignoring it made things worse? Finally, I grabbed my keys and went downstairs. It was late, probably close to midnight, and the hallway of my apartment building was eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly as I walked to the row of mailboxes by the front door. I hesitated before opening mine, half expecting something to jump out at me. But when I finally pulled the little metal door open, all that was inside was an envelope, plain white, unmarked. I took it upstairs, my hand shaking the whole way. Once I was back in my apartment, I locked the door, double-checked it, and sat down at the kitchen table to open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words written in neat, blocky handwriting. "You've been chosen." Beneath the words was a small, grainy photo. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at. It was me, sitting at my desk, taken through my webcam. After that, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every creak of the apartment, every car passing outside, made me jump. I spent the rest of the night staring at my laptop, trying to figure out what to do. I wanted to delete everything, throw the laptop in the trash, maybe even move to a new city. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't matter. When the sun finally came up, I checked my phone again. There was another text waiting for me. Task 2, prove your loyalty. No explanation, no instructions, just those 4 words. That's when I realized this wasn't going to stop. Whatever I'd gotten myself into, they weren't just going to let me walk away. I didn't leave my apartment all day after that. I sat there, staring at my phone, waiting for another message. My heart felt like it was permanently lodged in my throat. I kept checking the locks on my door, peeking through the peephole every 5 minutes, and shutting the blinds tighter than they already were. Prove your loyalty. Those words played on repeat in my head, taunting me. What did they mean? What exactly was I supposed to do? And what would happen if I didn't? By early evening, I'd convinced myself that I was overreacting. This had to be some elaborate prank, right? Some internet troll screwing with me because I was dumb enough to click on their creepy link. Maybe they hacked my webcam. Maybe they somehow knew my address. But that didn't mean they were actually dangerous. Did it? That illusion shattered around 9 p.m. when there was a knock at my door. Not the polite kind of knock you'd expect from a neighbor. This was loud, deliberate, like whoever was on the other side wanted me to know they weren't going away. I froze. The knock came again, harder this time. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. No answer, just another knock. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a heavy metal candlestick, and crept toward the door. My palms were so sweaty I almost dropped it. Peeking through the peephole, I saw nothing. The hallway was empty. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like my chest might burst. I debated calling the cops, But then I remembered Rule 2. Do not tell anyone. I was about to step back when I noticed something on the floor. A small square package wrapped in brown paper sitting just outside my door. I didn't want to open the door. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave it alone. But I couldn't just ignore it, not after everything that had happened. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and cracked it open just enough to reach out and grab the package. Then I slammed it shut, locked it again, and shoved a chair under the doorknob for good measure. The package was heavier than I expected. It was unmarked, no return address, no name, just a plain brown package sealed with tape. I tore it open, my hands trembling. Inside was something wrapped in layers of bubble wrap. I unwrapped it slowly, almost afraid of what I'd find. When I finally saw it, I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. It was a knife. Not just any knife, though. It was old, the handle worn and stained, the blade scratched and dull in places, but it was unmistakable. I'd seen pictures of it on that forum. It was his knife, the butcher's signature blade. I dropped it like it had burned me, backing away from the table so fast I almost tripped. My mind raced. Was it real? How the hell did they get it? And why would they send it to me? Before I could even process what was happening, my phone buzzed again. Another text. You have 1 hour. 1 hour for what? To do what? I didn't understand. Another buzz. This time, the message included an address. It was in the next town over, about a 20-minute drive. Bring the knife. Do not be late. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to convince myself not to go. This was insane. There was no way I was actually going to drive to some random address with a murder weapon in tow. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the cold knot of fear in my gut. Whoever these people were, they'd already proven they could find me. The longer I sat there, the more my paranoia grew. What if they were watching me right now? What if not showing up was worse than going? Against every ounce of common sense I had left, I grabbed the knife, threw on a hoodie, and headed for my car. The address led me to an abandoned strip mall on the edge of town. Most of the buildings were boarded up, their windows shattered. The parking lot was empty except for a single black van parked near the far end. I killed the engine and sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My phone buzzed again. Inside, back room. I wanted to drive away. I wanted to go home, pretend this never happened, and pray they'd forget about me. But some invisible force kept me rooted to the spot. Clutching the knife, I got out of the car and walked toward the building. The front door was ajar, hanging off its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and something metallic, like rust or blood. The floor creaked under my feet as I made my way down a narrow hallway. My flashlight danced over graffiti-covered walls and piles of trash, but I didn't see anyone. At the end of the hallway, I found a door with a faint red glow seeping out from beneath it. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like my ribs might crack. I pushed the door open. The room was small, lit by a single, flickering red bulb. In the center was a table, and on it lay a man. He was tied down, gagged, and blindfolded. His chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. On the wall above him, scrawled in what looked like blood, were the words, "Prove your loyalty." The knife felt heavy in my hand, like it was pulling me toward the table. My mind was racing. I couldn't do this. There was no way. Before I could even think about leaving, my phone buzzed again. Do it, now, or you'll take his place. I looked back at the man on the table. He was thrashing against his restraints, his muffled screams echoing in the tiny room. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And then I heard footsteps behind me. The footsteps behind me were slow and deliberate, the sound amplified in the small, echoing room. I froze, clutching the knife so tightly that my knuckles ached. I didn't dare turn around. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. "Do it!" a low voice growled behind me. I swallowed hard, my breath hitching in my chest. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't. I'm not, I stammered, my voice barely audible. The figure stepped closer, and I could feel the presence looming behind me, radiating a suffocating sense of dread. A gloved hand rested on my shoulder, heavy and cold. "You don't have a choice," the voice hissed. "You agreed to the rules." I shut my eyes, shaking my head. I wasn't a killer. I couldn't just stab some guy, no matter what kind of psychotic situation I'd gotten myself into. The man on the table whimpered, his thrashing becoming more frantic. I wanted to help him, but I was too terrified to move. The figure leaned in close, their breath hot against my ear. "Either he dies," they whispered, "or you do." I turned my head slightly, catching a glimpse of the person behind me. They wore a black mask with a crude hand-painted red smile slashed across it. Their eyes, visible through two small holes, were cold and empty. This was real. This wasn't some prank or internet game. These people were serious, and I was in way over my head. I can't, I stammered. The figure sighed, a sound full of frustration and menace. Then, without warning, they grabbed my wrist, forcing the knife closer to the man on the table. He screamed against the gag, his entire body bucking against the restraints. I tried to pull away, but the grip on my wrist was ironclad. "You will," the figure snarled, "or we'll carve you up instead." I don't know how long I stood there, trembling, the knife hovering just inches above the man's chest. My mind was blank, my body paralyzed. The only thing I could hear was the pounding of my heart and the man's muffled cries. Then, something inside me snapped. I don't know if it was fear, adrenaline, or sheer survival instinct, but I jerked my arm back as hard as I could, breaking free of the figure's grip. "I won't do it," I shouted, my voice cracking. The figure tilted their head, their expression unreadable behind the mask. For a moment, I thought they might kill me, right then and there. Instead, they stepped back, slowly clapping their hands. Well, they said, their tone amused. "Looks like we've got a fighter." Another figure stepped into the room, also masked, this one holding a camera. They positioned it so the lens was trained on me. "You're braver than most," the first figure said, "but bravery only gets you so far." I backed away, my grip tightening on the knife. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The first figure laughed, a low, chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "We want to see what you're made of," they said, "and you're going to show us, one way or another." Before I could respond, the second figure moved to the man on the table, pulling the gag from his mouth. He immediately started screaming, begging for help. "Please," he cried, "don't let them kill me. Please." His voice cracked with desperation, and I felt a surge of helplessness wash over me. "Shut him up," the first figure ordered, their voice sharp and commanding. The second figure grabbed a smaller knife from a tray on the table and held it to the man's throat. "No!" I shouted. "Oh, stop!" The first figure turned to me, their head cocked. "Then do it yourself," they said, gesturing to the knife in my hand. My stomach churned, and I thought I might vomit. My head was spinning, my vision tunneling. I couldn't do this. I wasn't a killer. The man on the table locked eyes with me, tears streaming down his face. "Please," he whispered, "don't let them hurt me." I looked down at the knife in my hand, my mind racing. Was there a way out of this? Could I fight them? Could I free him and make a run for it? "Tick-tock," the first figure said, their voice sing-song. Desperation overtook me. I lunged at the second figure, swinging the knife wildly. It wasn't a plan. It was pure instinct. The blade caught their arm, and they stumbled back, cursing. The first figure moved faster than I expected, grabbing me by the collar and slamming me against the wall. "You've got guts," they said, their voice low and dangerous. "But you're starting to test my patience." I struggled against their grip, gasping for air. "We're done here," the first figure said, tossing me to the floor. The second figure, now holding their injured arm, stepped forward and grabbed the camera, pointing it at me. "This one's going to be fun to watch," they said, their tone dripping with malice. The first figure knelt beside me, their mask inches from my face. "Congratulations," they said. "You've passed the first round." I stared at them, my mind reeling. Passed? What the hell did that mean? They stood, motioning for the second figure to follow. "Take care now," the first figure said, their tone mocking. "We'll be in touch." With that, they left, slamming the door behind them. I scrambled to my feet, rushing to the table to untie the man. But when I reached him, he was gone. The table was empty, the restraints lying loose. I don't remember driving home that night. The whole thing felt like a fever dream, like I was watching myself from outside my body. When I got back to my apartment, there was a package waiting for me outside my door. Inside was a flash drive. I plugged it into my laptop, my hands shaking. A single video file popped up. It was footage of me, standing in the red-lit room, the knife in my hand, staring at the man on the table. A message appeared on the screen. "The hunt has just begun." The days after I received the flash drive were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. Every shadow in my apartment felt alive. Every knock or distant sound sent me into a spiral. I kept replaying the video on the flash drive, hoping to catch some detail, some clue that would explain what was happening. But it was always the same, me, standing there with the knife, paralyzed by fear. By the third day, I was barely functioning. I'd blocked the windows with blankets, unplugged my laptop, and turned off my phone. None of it helped. I felt like I was constantly being watched, like their eyes were everywhere. Then, just when I thought the silence might drive me insane, there was another knock at my door. It was softer this time, almost polite, but somehow even more sinister. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I sat on the floor, gripping the candlestick I'd been carrying around like a security blanket. The knock came again, followed by the faint sound of something sliding under the door. When I finally mustered the courage to look, I found a small envelope on the floor. Inside was a single piece of paper with an address scribbled on it, along with 2 words, "Final task." I told myself I wasn't going. I told myself it was over, that I could just ignore it and move on with my life. But deep down, I knew better. These people, whoever they were, weren't going to let me walk away. The address was in an industrial area on the outskirts of the city, a place I'd never been before. The whole drive there, I kept expecting to see someone tailing me, but the roads were empty. When I arrived, I found myself in front of an old warehouse, its windows broken and its exterior covered in graffiti. The place looked abandoned, but the large metal door at the front was slightly ajar. I parked a block away and sat there for what felt like an eternity, trying to summon the courage to go inside. My heart was pounding, my hands slick with sweat. Finally, I grabbed the knife. They'd never asked for it back, and slipped it into the pocket of my hoodie before heading toward the warehouse. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint smell of something rotten. The only light came from a series of flickering bulbs strung along the ceiling, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The sound of my footsteps echoed as I made my way deeper into the building. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to turn around, to run, but I couldn't. Eventually, I reached a large open space in the center of the warehouse. In the middle of the room was a chair, and in the chair sat a man, bound and gagged, his head slumped forward, my stomach twisted. Above him, painted on the wall in thick, dark strokes, were the words, "Your final test awaits." I didn't want to get any closer, but something compelled me to move forward. As I approached the chair, I realized the man was unconscious, or worse. His chest wasn't moving, and his skin had a sickly, pale hue. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I nearly dropped it in surprise. It was a text, no number, just the same string of symbols as before. "Finish what you started." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. I wasn't sure what they wanted from me. The man looked dead already. What was left to finish? My phone buzzed again. "If you hesitate, you'll regret it." I looked around the room, half expecting someone to step out of the shadows, but I was alone. At least it seemed that way. Then a faint sound broke the silence, a low, mechanical whirring. I turned toward the source and saw a camera mounted in the corner of the room, its lens trained on me. They were watching. I stood there, frozen, staring at the man in the chair. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, but I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the floor. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move. I reached out and touched the man's shoulder, gently at first, then harder. He didn't respond. My phone buzzed again. "Do it!" My hands trembled as I pulled the knife from my pocket. The blade gleamed under the flickering light, and for a moment I saw my own reflection in it, pale, wide-eyed, and terrified. I stepped closer, raising the knife. My breath was shallow, my heart hammering in my chest. Then the man's head snapped up. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, his mouth twisted in a gagged scream. He thrashed against the restraints, his muffled cries echoing through the empty warehouse. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the knife. My vision blurred as panic took over. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. The camera whirred again, its lens adjusting to focus on me. "Help me!" the man screamed through the gag, his voice muffled but desperate. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. My mind was a mess of terror and confusion. Then the lights went out. The darkness was absolute, swallowing me whole. I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, circling me. My breathing was loud and ragged, the sound of it almost drowning out the faint whispers that seemed to come from every direction. "He's not one of us," a voice said, low and guttural. "He's weak," another hissed. The voices grew louder, overlapping, becoming a chaotic symphony of malice. Then, just as suddenly as they'd gone out, the lights flickered back on. The man in the chair was gone. In his place was a knife, identical to the one I'd been holding, its blade coated in fresh blood. I didn't wait for another text. I ran. I don't even remember getting back to my car. My body was on autopilot, moving purely on instinct. By the time I got home, the sun was rising, but the warm light did nothing to calm me. When I opened the door to my apartment, the first thing I noticed was the smell, coppery and sour. My stomach churned as I followed the scent to my living room. There, on the floor, was the same chair from the warehouse, and in the chair was a man, bound and gagged, his lifeless eyes staring at me. The knife was in my hand again, and this time, the camera was in my apartment. The police came after the neighbors reported screams. They found me sitting on the floor, covered in blood, the knife still clutched in my hand. I told them everything about the forum, the texts, the tasks, but when they checked my laptop and phone, there was nothing. No messages, no video files, nothing to prove what had happened. The man in the chair was identified as a drifter, someone with no family, no ties, someone who wouldn't be missed. They think I killed him, and maybe I did. I haven't heard from them since that night, but I know it's not over. The hunt never really ends. My sister disappeared after taking a job at a secret lab in Alaska. A dark web video claims to show her final moments, but she's still moving in the footage. Hey Reddit, I've been lurking here for years, but I never thought I'd actually post. Honestly, I still don't know if I should be doing this, but I feel like I have no one else to talk to. Maybe if I put this out there, someone can help me make sense of it, or maybe just help me sleep at night. So, a little background. My sister, Emily, was the smartest person I've ever met. She was one of those people who excelled at everything. Straight A's, scholarships, and that weird ability to finish a 1,000-piece puzzle in a single afternoon. She was always the science person in our family. When I struggled with high school algebra, Emily was in her room hacking apart radios and building something she'd call a frequency scanner, or some other word salad I didn't understand. She got her degree in biochemistry, and after graduation, she started job hopping between labs all over the country. She was always excited about whatever project she was working on, but she'd never really tell me the details. Confidential stuff, she'd say, waving it off like it was no big deal. I didn't press her. Scientific research isn't exactly my area of expertise. I'm more of a Netflix and DoorDash kind of guy. Anyway, about 6 months ago, Emily got this weird job offer. It came out of nowhere. She didn't even apply for it. Some private research group reached out to her directly, offering insane pay and benefits. The only catch, the lab was in the middle of nowhere in Alaska, like literally nowhere. The kind of place you can't even find on Google Maps. At first, she wasn't sure about it. I mean, Alaska? She'd never even seen snow before. But the money was too good to pass up, and Emily has always been curious. The whole secret lab thing, that didn't freak her out. It intrigued her. She called it an adventure. I should have stopped her. Before she left, she gave me this big speech about how much this meant to her and how I shouldn't worry. She even laughed when I joked about her being recruited by some Bond villain. It's just research, Nick. I'll be fine, she said. And that was it. She packed up her life, said goodbye, and boarded a flight to Anchorage. I didn't know it at the time, but that would be the last time I'd see her. The first signs. Something was wrong. For the first couple of months, everything seemed normal. Emily would text me occasionally, pictures of snowy landscapes, stories about the weirdly aggressive moose that wandered near the lab. She never said much about the actual work, but she seemed happy. And then, one day, the texts just stopped. At first, I didn't think much of it. She told me her internet and cell service were spotty out there. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to worry. I left voicemails, sent emails, even DM'd her on Instagram. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished. When I called the company that hired her, some guy with a heavy accent and zero patience told me, "Ms. Emily is unavailable at this time." When I asked if she was okay, he just hung up. I tried not to panic. Maybe she was just busy. Maybe her phone broke. I kept telling myself that until I got the letter. One night, about 2 months ago, I came home from work and found an unmarked envelope sitting on my kitchen counter. No stamps, no return address, just my name, scrawled across the front in messy black ink. My first thought, it was some prank from my roommate, Carl. He's the kind of guy who thinks hiding fake spiders in my cereal is hilarious. But when I opened the envelope, my stomach dropped. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words written on it. She's still alive. No signature, no explanation, just those 3 words. The handwriting didn't match Emily's or anyone else I knew. I asked Kyle if he left it, but he swore he had no idea where it came from. And honestly, I believed him. He's a jerk sometimes, but he's not that creative. That letter was the first real crack in my sense of reality. I mean, what does that even mean? She's still alive? Of course she's alive, right? The deep web rabbit hole. I started obsessing over Emily's disappearance. I stayed up all night Googling everything I could about the company she worked for. But here's the thing. They barely exist. No website, no contact info, not even a LinkedIn page. The only thing I could find was a single Reddit thread from 5 years ago. It was some guy ranting about how his cousin got recruited by the same company and was never heard from again. That's when I got desperate. I've always heard about the deep web, you know, that creepy underbelly of the internet, where you can supposedly buy anything from fake passports to hitmen. I figured if anyone knew about a shady, off-the-grid research lab, it'd be there. So, I downloaded Tor. Don't do this, by the way. And I started digging. At first, it was just a bunch of garbage, shady marketplaces, forums with broken English, and sites that looked like they hadn't been updated since 2003. But after a few nights, I found a private forum called Silent Signals. It was mostly conspiracy theorists, but one thread caught my attention. Private labs and human experimentation. The posts were disturbing. People talking about scientists going missing, secret facilities in remote locations, and experiments on non-consenting participants. One comment mentioned a lab in Alaska. Another claimed they'd seen footage of what happens to the test subjects. I clicked on a link someone posted. It led to a video. The video I'm not proud of what I did, but I had to know. The video was hosted on some sketchy site with a warning in bold red letters. Viewer discretion advised. I hesitated for a second, but then I hit play. The screen was dark at first, just static and faint whispers. Then the camera focused. It was a small room, almost like a hospital ward, but everything was dirty. Peeling paint, rusted equipment, and this weird greenish tint to the light. In the center of the room was a woman strapped to a chair. It was Emily. Her hair was longer, messier, but it was her. I'd know her face anywhere. She wasn't screaming or crying. She was just sitting there, staring straight ahead, like she was in a trance. And then she moved. But it wasn't normal movement. It was jerky, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. Her head twitched to one side, her arm shot out, her fingers clawing at the air, and her eyes, God, her eyes, they were wide open, but there was nothing behind them. No recognition, no life, just emptiness. The video cut out after that, replaced by a single sentence flashing across the screen. She's still alive. After watching that video, I couldn't breathe. My body froze in this tight knot of dread, like I'd just looked into something I was never meant to see. My brain was screaming at me that it wasn't real, that it was just some sick prank or deep fake. But deep down, I knew it was her, my sister. And whatever they'd done to her, she wasn't right anymore. I slammed my laptop shut, but the damage was already done. That image, Emily jerking around like a broken marionette, her dead eyes staring at nothing, was burned into my brain. I sat there in the dark for what felt like hours, trying to process it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Every time I tried to breathe, I heard that faint static from the video. But here's the thing, I swear to you, I started hearing the static outside the video too. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe my brain was just scrambled from the stress. But then, later that night, I heard it again. A faint, crackling hiss, like an old radio trying to tune into a station. It wasn't coming from my laptop or my phone. It was coming from the walls. I tore through the house like a lunatic, unplugging everything, my Wi-Fi router, the TV, even my microwave. But the sound didn't stop. It followed me, always faint, always just barely audible, like it was hiding right under the surface of reality. And then the whispers started. I was lying in bed, trying to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind, when I heard it. A low, garbled voice, murmuring words I couldn't understand. It wasn't coming from my room, though. It was coming from inside the static. The sound was faint, but insistent, like it wanted me to listen, to focus. I leaned closer to the wall, and for a split second, I could have sworn I heard someone say my name. Nick. It wasn't Emily's voice. It wasn't anyone's voice I recognized, but the way it said my name, slow, deliberate, like it knew me, it sent chills down my spine. The email. The next morning, I woke up to an email in my inbox. It was from an address I didn't recognize, just a random string of letters and numbers, followed by some sketchy domain. The subject line read, "We can help you." Now, normally, I'd delete something like that without a second thought. But after the video, the static and the whispers, I wasn't exactly in a normal state of mind. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The email was short, just 2 sentences. "You're in danger. If you want answers, meet us here." Below that was a link to a location on Google Maps. It was a diner about 40 miles outside of town, just off the highway. No explanation, no details, just that cryptic message and the address. Every rational part of me was screaming to ignore it. This had to be some kind of trap, right? But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever sent this knew about Emily, about the video, about everything. And if there was even the smallest chance they could help me find her, I had to take it. So I went. The stranger. The diner was the kind of place you drive past 100 times without even noticing. Faded sign, peeling paint, a few rusted trucks in the parking lot. Inside, it was almost empty. Just a bored waitress behind the counter and a couple of old guys nursing their coffee in a booth. Nobody even looked up when I walked in. I didn't know who I was supposed to meet, so I just sat at the counter and waited, trying not to look as paranoid as I felt. After about 10 minutes, a man slid onto the stool next to me. I didn't even notice him at first. He just sort of appeared there, like he'd been part of the shadows. He was tall, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of stone. Sharp cheekbones, deep lines, and eyes so dark they almost looked black. He was wearing this ratty old coat that smelled like rain and cigarettes. Before I could say anything, he spoke. "You shouldn't have watched the video." His voice was low, almost a growl, and it sent a jolt of fear through me. I stammered something stupid, like, "Who are you?" But he just shook his head. "They're watching you now," he said. "They've been watching since the moment you clicked play." I felt my stomach drop. "Who's they?" I asked, but he didn't answer. Instead, he slid a folded piece of paper across the counter. "Go here," he said, "but be careful. They don't like people asking questions." Before I could ask him anything else, he got up and left. Just walked out like he'd never been there at all. I opened the paper. It was another address, this time in the middle of some industrial district downtown. The warehouse. The address led to an old warehouse at the edge of the city. It was abandoned, the kind of place where you'd expect to find squatters or graffiti, but it was dead silent when I got there. No birds, no traffic, nothing. Just this eerie, oppressive stillness. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and rust. The walls were covered in strange symbols, like something out of a cult movie. Circles, lines, and jagged shapes that seemed to twist and writhe when I looked at them too long. In the center of the room was a single TV, an old boxy model sitting on top of a wooden crate. It was on, but the screen was just static, the same crackling hiss I'd been hearing in my walls. As I stepped closer, the static started to change. It shifted, forming shapes, outlines, until it became a grainy image of a face. Emily's face. Her lips didn't move, but her voice came through the speakers, warped and distorted. "Nick," she said, "you shouldn't be here." I froze. "Emily?" My voice cracked. "What's going on? Where are you?" "They're coming," she said. "You need to run." Before I could say anything else, the screen went black, and the TV let out this high-pitched whine that made my ears bleed. I stumbled back, covering my ears, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps, coming from behind me. I turned around, and my heart stopped. Standing in the doorway was a man in a lab coat. His face was blank, expressionless, and his eyes were like Emily's in the video. Empty, dead, and then he moved. It wasn't natural. His arms and legs jerked like a glitching video game character, his head snapping side to side as he walked toward me. I bolted, sprinting out of the warehouse and into the night. But as I ran, I swear I could still hear the static, following me, whispering my name. I don't remember driving home. My mind was running on autopilot, my body moving faster than my thoughts. All I know is that one moment I was bolting out of that warehouse, and the next I was in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that twitching man in the lab coat sprinting after me. But the road was empty. By the time I got home, it was almost 3 a.m., but I didn't feel the slightest bit tired. I locked every door, every window, even shoved furniture in front of the back door just in case. The static sound was still there, faint but constant, like it was embedded in the air around me. I turned on every light in the house, pacing the living room, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Who were those people? Why did that man in the diner know so much, And why did Emily tell me to run? My thoughts were a tangled mess, each question leading to another dead end. All I knew for sure was this: I wasn't safe anymore. And then my phone buzzed. At first, I almost didn't hear it, over the static, but when I looked down, there it was, a text message from an unknown number. My stomach churned as I picked up the phone. The message was short, just one sentence. Leave now. They're outside. I froze. My heart pounded so loudly, I could feel it in my skull. Slowly, I crept to the front window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek outside. That's when I saw it. A black van was parked across the street, its headlights off, the engine idling softly. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside, but I could feel someone watching me. My breath hitched, and for a split second, I thought about calling the cops. But what was I going to say? That a creepy van was parked outside my house, that my sister had disappeared into some shadowy research lab, and now I was being hunted by glitching lab coat puppets. Yeah, they'd lock me up instead. The van's engine revved, and the headlights flicked on, flooding my living room with light. I stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. The sound of it shattering on the floor snapped me out of my panic, and I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the back door. The chase. The moment I stepped outside, I felt like I was being watched. The air was heavy, the kind of weight that presses down on you and makes it hard to breathe. I didn't stop to think. I just ran. My car was parked in the driveway, but as I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The van had moved. It was now parked at the end of my street, its headlights still blazing. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest as I unlocked my car and jumped inside. The second I turned the key, the van's engine roared to life. It sped toward me, tires screeching. I threw the car into reverse and floored it, backing out of the driveway so fast I almost hit my neighbor's mailbox. The van swerved, barely missing me, and then spun around to follow. As I peeled out of the neighborhood, they didn't just want to scare me, they wanted me gone. The chase was pure chaos. The van stayed glued to my bumper, no matter how many turns I took. I tried everything, doubling back, weaving through side streets, even cutting through a gas station parking lot, but they were always right behind me. The whole time, the static was in my ears, growing louder and louder, almost drowning out the sound of my own racing thoughts. And then I made a mistake. I turned down a dead-end street. The van skidded to a stop behind me, blocking my only exit. For a second, everything was silent. No engine noise, no static, just the sound of my ragged breathing. And then the doors of the van slid open. The figures. 2 figures stepped out, their movements slow and deliberate. They were both wearing black suits, like some knockoff version of the Men in Black, but their faces weren't right. Their skin was pale and waxy, almost plastic looking, and their eyes had that same empty, glossy look as Emily's in the video. One of them raised a hand and pointed at me. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I threw the car into reverse, slamming on the gas. The tires squealed as I backed up, straight into a chain link fence. The impact jarred me, but I didn't stop. I hit the gas again, this time ramming straight into the van. The figures didn't even flinch. I managed to squeeze the car past the van, scraping the side against a dumpster as I sped away. In my rearview mirror, I saw the 2 figures standing in the street, watching me go. They didn't chase me. They didn't even move. But I knew this wasn't over. The Red Room. I drove for hours, aimlessly weaving through back roads and side streets until I was sure no one was following me. Finally, I pulled into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, paid for a room in cash, and barricaded the door with the dresser. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The static was still there, faint but insistent, and every shadow in the room felt like it was hiding something. Around 4 a.m., I opened my laptop. I didn't want to go back on the dark web, not after everything that had happened, but I needed answers. I logged into the forum where I'd found the video, but the thread was gone, deleted, like it had never existed. I tried searching for it, but every link I clicked led to a 404 error. It was like someone was scrubbing the internet clean. And then, out of nowhere, my laptop screen flickered. The static returned, this time louder, harsher, like nails on a chalkboard. The screen went black, and a single line of text appeared in blood-red letters. "Stop digging." I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking, but the message was clear. Whoever these people were, they were done playing games. The phone call. That morning, I got a call from an unknown number. For a second, I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Nick," the voice said. It was Emily, but it wasn't really her. Her voice was distorted, almost robotic, like someone was mimicking her. "Emily," I whispered. "Where are you? What's happening?" "You have to stop," she said. "They won't let you find me. They'll take you too." "Emily, please." "Goodbye, Nick," she said. And then the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. That wasn't Emily. It couldn't have been. But whoever, or whatever it was, they wanted me to give up. I'm not giving up. I didn't leave the motel for 2 days. I barely ate, barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, those blank, waxy faces, Emily strapped to that chair, her body jerking like something had hollowed her out and was moving her like a puppet. And the static, it was always there, crawling under my skin like an itch I couldn't scratch. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. Whatever was happening, wherever Emily was, sitting in a dingy motel room wasn't going to help. But I didn't know where to go, who to trust. Every time I thought about going to the police, I pictured those blank-eyed men, their movements sharp and unnatural, and I knew they'd find me before I ever got a word out. But then, on the third night, something happened. It was almost midnight. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at my laptop, like it might magically give me answers when the TV in the room turned on by itself. There was no click, no static, just a burst of light, and then it was on. I jumped, my heart hammering in my chest. The screen was blank at first, just a deep, empty black, and then, slowly, an image conveyed in. It was Emily's face, but it wasn't like before. This time she looked alive. Her eyes were wide and filled with fear, darting around as though she could see me. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. And then, words started flashing on the screen, superimposed over her image in jagged white letters. "Location compromised. They're coming." Before I could react, the motel room phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the silence like a knife. I stared at it, my hands frozen in my lap. It rang 3 times, 4 times. On the 5th ring, I picked it up. "Get out!" a voice hissed. It wasn't Emily's voice this time. It was something else, deep and gravelly, like static turned into speech. "They're here." As soon as the voice spoke, the room went dark. The TV shut off, the lights flickered, and I was left in complete silence. For a moment, I thought the power had gone out, but then I saw it. Shadows moving outside the window. The escape. I didn't wait to find out who or what was outside. I grabbed my keys, my laptop, and bolted for the door. I didn't even bother taking my bag. The parking lot was eerily quiet, lit only by a flickering street lamp. My car was parked near the edge, and as I ran toward it, I saw movement in the corner of my eye. 3 figures were standing at the far end of the lot, watching me. They weren't moving, just standing there, their silhouettes unnaturally still against the pale glow of the streetlight. I didn't look back. I jumped into the car, turned the key, and floored it. My tires screeched as I sped out of the lot, and in the rearview mirror, I saw them start to move. Not walking, not running, just jerking forward, like something was pulling them along. As I drove, I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting to see their blank faces pressed against my window. But the road behind me was empty. Still, the static was louder than ever, filling my ears with its maddening hiss. I turned on the radio, hoping to drown it out, but every station was just more static. It was like the entire world had been swallowed by it. And then, a voice cut through the noise. "Turn left," it said. It wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from the static itself. The voice was faint, almost lost in the hiss, but it was clear enough to make my skin crawl. It was Emily's voice. "Turn left," she said again. "Hurry." I didn't even think. I cranked the wheel and turned onto a narrow, unmarked road. The pavement was cracked and uneven, bordered by dense trees that seemed to close in around me the farther I went. I didn't know where I was going, but Emily's voice kept guiding me, telling me when to turn, when to speed up, when to slow down. And then, finally, she said, "Stop." The signal tower. I stopped the car in front of an old radio tower. It was massive, rising high above the trees, its metal frame rusted and covered in vines. A faint hum filled the air, vibrating through my chest. The static in my ears grew louder as I stepped out of the car, almost deafening. At the base of the tower was a small shack, its door slightly ajar. The inside was pitch black, but the static seemed to be coming from within. As I stepped closer, I saw something scrawled on the door in red paint. "The signal holds her." My heart pounded as I pushed the door open. The inside of the shack was cramped, filled with old equipment. Radios, monitors, wires snaking across the floor. Everything was coated in a thick layer of dust, like it hadn't been touched in years. And then I saw it. In the center of the room was a screen, glowing faintly. On it was Emily. She was strapped to a chair, just like in the first video, but this time, her eyes were moving. She looked right at me. "Nick," she said, her voice trembling. "You found me." I didn't know what to say. My throat felt like it was closing up. "What's happening?" I finally managed to choke out. "Where are you?" Her face twisted in fear. "They're using me. The signal. It's controlling us. They're watching through me, Nick. They're coming for you." "Who? Who's coming?" I shouted. Before she could answer, the screen flickered, and the static surged. So loud it felt like my skull was splitting open. I staggered back, clutching my head, and when I looked up again, Emily was gone. The screen was blank, and then I heard it. The sound of footsteps outside the shack. The surge. I turned toward the door just as it burst open. A figure stepped inside, its movements jerky and unnatural, its face blank and empty. Behind it, more figures appeared, their eyes glinting in the dim light like polished glass. I stumbled backward, my hand brushing against the controls on one of the machines. Without thinking, I yanked a lever, and the hum of the tower grew louder. The figures froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. For a moment, they just stood there, twitching, as if the noise was interfering with whatever was controlling them. And then, one by one, they started to collapse. The static in my ears was unbearable now, but I didn't care. I grabbed a heavy wrench from the floor and smashed the controls, sending sparks flying. The hum from the tower turned into a high-pitched whine, and the figures began to writhe, their limbs bending at impossible angles. But just as I thought I was safe, I felt a hand grab my arm. I turned to see one of them, its face inches from mine, its mouth stretched into a twisted, unnatural smile. Its grip was cold, like ice, and as it pulled me closer, it whispered two words that froze me in place. Too late. The thing's grip tightened, its icy fingers digging into my arm like iron clamps. I tried to pull away, but it was impossibly strong. Its face, smooth, waxy, and dead-eyed, twitched unnaturally as it leaned closer. The twisted smile never faltered, even as it whispered again. Too late. The sound wasn't a voice anymore. It was the static, woven into something that almost resembled words. My ears were ringing, my vision blurring from the relentless noise. I thrashed, swinging the wrench blindly. The first hit glanced off its shoulder, but the second connected with its head. The impact sent it stumbling backward, its body jerking like a broken robot. I didn't wait for it to recover. I bolted out of the shack and into the night. The tower loomed above me, humming with an unnatural energy that seemed to pulse in time with the static. The air felt charged, heavy, like a thunderstorm was about to break. But it wasn't just the tower. It was the forest. The trees around me swayed, their branches twisting like they were alive, reaching for me. I could feel them closing in, the darkness thickening, suffocating, and then I saw the others. They were everywhere, emerging from the shadows, their blank faces glowing faintly in the dim light of the tower. Dozens of them, maybe more, their bodies twitching as they moved toward me. They weren't running. They didn't need to. They knew there was nowhere to go. The descent I ran, weaving through the trees, my lungs burning with every step. The static followed me, louder than ever, drowning out every thought, every instinct. The forest felt endless, the ground beneath my feet uneven and treacherous. More than once, I stumbled, but sheer adrenaline kept me moving. Then, I saw it. A metal hatch, half buried in the dirt, surrounded by rusted machinery and overgrown weeds. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but in that moment, it was my only chance. I yanked it open, the hinges screeching in protest, and climbed down into the darkness. The ladder led to a narrow tunnel, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of oil and decay. I could still hear the static, muffled but persistent, echoing down the corridor like a distant scream. I didn't stop to think. I just kept moving, my footsteps echoing against the cold concrete walls. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning like some nightmarish labyrinth. At every corner, I expected to see one of them, those blank-eyed figures waiting for me in the shadows. But I didn't. Not yet. The lab. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a massive chamber. It was a lab, or at least it had been at some point. The room was filled with rows of shattered glass tubes, their surfaces streaked with dark, unidentifiable stains. Monitors flickered with static, their screens cracked and covered in dust. Everything felt wrong, like the air itself was warped, bending under some unseen pressure. In the center of the room was a chair, and in the chair was Emily. She wasn't strapped down this time. She was just sitting there, her head tilted to one side, her eyes staring blankly at the floor. For a moment, I thought she was dead, but then her fingers twitched, and her head snapped up to look at me. "Nick," she said, her voice flat, mechanical. "You shouldn't have come." I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "Emily, it's me. I'm here to get you out." She didn't respond. Her body twitched, her limbs jerking unnaturally as she stood up. Her movements were stiff, puppet-like, just like in the video. And her eyes, God, her eyes were wrong. They were empty, lifeless, but somehow still watching me. "You can't save me," she said, her voice layered with static. "They've already won." I didn't know what to do. I reached out to her, but the moment I touched her arm, she recoiled, her body convulsing. The monitors around us flared to life, displaying images I couldn't make sense of. Flashes of faces, diagrams, and symbols that hurt to look at. The static was deafening now, filling the room with its relentless hiss. And then I heard the voice again. "They will become us," it said. This time, it wasn't coming from Emily or the monitors. It was everywhere, vibrating through the walls, the floor, even the air. "She is ours." The truth. The monitors shifted, their images aligning into something coherent. A single word flashed across the screens. "Experiment." And then, the images began. I saw people, dozens, maybe hundreds, trapped in rooms just like this one. Some were strapped to chairs, their bodies jerking and twitching as wires snaked into their skin. Others were standing motionless, their faces blank, their eyes hollow. And then I saw Emily. Not the Emily in front of me, but another version of her, sitting in that same chair, her head tilted back as a machine lowered toward her face. The video cut to black, replaced by a single sentence. "The signal binds us." My stomach churned. This wasn't a lab. It was a testing site. They were using people, experimenting with something that controlled them, turned them into whatever these things were. And Emily, my sister, wasn't just a victim. She was part of it now. I turned to her, tears streaming down my face. "Emily, please, tell me how to help you." For the first time, her expression changed. A flicker of something human crossed her face. Fear, pain, regret. "You can't," she whispered. "They won't let me go." The room began to shake, the lights flickering wildly. The static reached a fever pitch, and the voice returned, louder than ever. "Leave, or become one of us." The choice. I didn't want to leave her. Every part of me screamed to fight, to do something, anything, to save her. But the figures were coming. I could hear them in the tunnels, their footsteps echoing, their distorted voices whispering in unison. "Join us." Emily stepped back, her body twitching. "You have to go," she said, her voice breaking, "before it's too late." I hesitated for one agonizing moment, and then I ran. The end. I don't know how I made it out. The tunnel seemed endless, and the static never stopped. But eventually, I found another hatch and climbed out into the freezing night air. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was going, not caring. I just needed to get as far away as possible. That was 3 days ago. The static is still in my head. Sometimes I hear whispers, Emily's voice, faint and broken, calling my name. I know I can't stay here much longer. They'll find me. They always do. But I had to tell someone. I had to let the world know what's out there, what's happening in those labs. Emily's gone, but maybe, just maybe, someone else can be saved. If you see a video on the dark web, one that promises answers about something you've lost, don't watch it. Don't go looking for the truth, because the truth will find you, and it won't let you go. My friend found a dark website selling maps to abandoned facilities. The one we visited in Nevada wasn't abandoned. You know those nights when you're up late, half bored, half curious, and just one bad idea away from making a terrible decision? That was me about a month ago. My buddy Alex and I were hanging out at his apartment, scrolling through Reddit, watching YouTube videos, and swapping random creepy stories we'd heard over the years. Somewhere around 2 a.m., Alex casually mentioned he'd been exploring the deep web. I know what you're thinking. Oh great, here we go. Another deep web horror story. But I swear, Alex wasn't some sketchy hacker or wannabe edgy guy. He's just curious. The kind of guy who can't resist poking the bear if it means finding something weird or unusual. Most of the time, it's harmless, like buying a box of random stuff off eBay or dumpster diving for old electronics. But this was different. So, Alex said, leaning back in his chair with this smug grin, I found this site last night that's basically Craigslist for urban explorers. I raised an eyebrow. Urban explorers, like people who sneak into abandoned buildings and stuff. Exactly, he said, spinning his laptop around so I could see. The site had this grimy, low-budget design, just white text on a black background, and it wasn't even in English. There were grainy images of old warehouses, tunnels, and decrepit factories with listings like abandoned steel mill in Michigan, $50 map, derelict psychiatric hospital, Midwest, $100, restricted Cold War facility, Nevada, $250. It looked sketchy as hell. They sell maps? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm while a small knot of unease started twisting in my gut. Yup. You buy the map. They send you GPS coordinates, sometimes with a little backstory about what the place is, Alex said, his voice brimming with excitement. Dude, some of these are places that aren't even on Google Maps. I laughed nervously. And this is on the deep web because... Alex shrugged. Probably trespassing laws. Some of these spots are still technically government property. Or maybe it's all a scam. Who knows? I'm thinking about buying one though. That's when I should have stopped him. I should have said, nope, bad idea, or made up some excuse to leave. But Alex's enthusiasm was contagious, and I'll admit, part of me was intrigued. It wasn't like we were planning to rob a bank or anything. It was just an adventure. So, against my better judgment, I said, okay, which one are you thinking? Alex scrolled through the listings until he landed on one that made my stomach flip. Experimental Research Facility, Nevada, $300, detailed map plus site info. He clicked on the description and a small block of text popped up. High clearance research facility from the 1980s, abandoned after funding cuts, underground levels accessible. Hazardous materials may still be present. Proceed at your own risk. Hazardous materials? I repeated, incredulous. It's just legalese, Alex said with a wave of his hand. They have to say that, right? Like they can't get sued if some idiot stumbles into an old vat of chemicals or something. I shook my head, but he was already pulling out his phone to make the payment. A few clicks later, it was done. So I thought Alex was bluffing. I mean, $300 for a map to some random facility in the Nevada desert. It sounded like one of those things you do when you're sleep deprived and riding the high of a late-night caffeine buzz, only to wake up the next day wondering what the hell you were thinking. But Alex wasn't bluffing. 2 days later, I got a text. Dude, the map came in. I wasn't even sure how that worked. Like, how does something digital get delivered through the deep web? Turns out, the seller sent Alex a download link through some sketchy encrypted email. He called me over to his apartment that evening, practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. When I got there, Alex already had the map pulled up on his screen. It wasn't some hand-drawn thing either. It was professional looking, almost military grade. Satellite imagery with topographic overlays, key points marked with precise coordinates, and a detailed legend that explained what everything meant. There were notes written in the margins, stuff like, main entrance collapsed, use access tunnel. Security systems offline, unconfirmed. Sub-level 3, hazard zone, proceed through caution. It even came with a separate PDF that gave the history of the site. Apparently, it was built in the early 80s, part of some Cold War era research program. They didn't specify exactly what they were researching, but it involved biological testing and experimental containment systems. The kind of vague phrasing that sets off alarm bells in your head, right? Here's the kicker. The site was located in the middle of nowhere, about 50 miles off any major road. The only way to get there was a dirt path that branched off some nameless highway in Nevada. No signage, no markers, just miles of desert and a lonely set of GPS coordinates. Okay, this is intense, I said, trying to hide how uneasy I felt. That's the point. Alex grinned like a kid on Christmas morning. Think about it. How many people have been here? Probably none in years. It's like finding buried treasure, man. Besides, it's just an old building. What's the worst that could happen? I didn't have an answer, but my gut was screaming at me to back out. Of course, Alex had already started making plans. He had the weekend free, and he'd borrowed a beat-up SUV from his co-worker for better clearance on dirt roads. All I had to do was say no, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to seem like a coward. Maybe I was just as curious as Alex, but too stubborn to admit it. The drive. We left early Saturday morning. The drive to Nevada wasn't bad. Long stretches of empty road, the kind of trip where you lose yourself in the monotony of the landscape. I kept thinking about how weirdly quiet it was. No other cars, no wildlife, not even the usual desert birds. Just us, the endless horizon, and the occasional tumbleweed bouncing across the highway. The GPS eventually told us to take an unmarked dirt road. That's when things started feeling wrong. The farther we drove, the more the landscape seemed to change. It wasn't anything obvious, just a subtle shift, like the air got heavier or the colors around us seemed duller. Even the sky looked weird, like the clouds had frozen in place. I didn't say anything, but I could tell Alex felt it too. He stopped joking around and started focusing on the road. After about an hour of bouncing along the dirt path, we saw it, a rusted chain-link fence with a no trespassing sign. Beyond that was a massive concrete structure, partially buried in the side of a hill. The building looked like it had been swallowed by the desert, with sand creeping up the walls and vines snaking through cracks in the concrete. It was obvious no one had been here in a long time. "This is it," Alex said, grinning ear to ear. He grabbed his backpack, stuffed with flashlights, gloves, and some snacks, and hopped out of the SUV. I hesitated for a second, staring at the building, trying to shake the feeling that something was watching us. "Coming?" Alex called. already halfway to the fence. I sighed and followed him. The fence wasn't even locked, just looped shut with a loose piece of wire. We ducked under it and made our way to the main entrance. The door was steel, corroded but intact. Alex pushed on it, and after a bit of effort, it groaned open. Inside, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Not the usual musty, abandoned building smell. This was worse. It was sharp, metallic, with an undercurrent of something sour. The air felt thick, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. The entryway was small, just a narrow hallway, with peeling paint and flickering overhead lights. Wait, lights? Why are the lights on? I asked, stopping dead in my tracks. Alex shrugged. Backup generators, maybe? Some of these old places have them, and they run forever. Yeah, but why would they still be running? He didn't answer, just kept walking, his flashlight beam cutting through the dim corridor. I followed reluctantly, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway led to a large central chamber, lined with empty desks and filing cabinets. Papers were scattered everywhere, as if someone had left in a hurry. Alex picked up one of the documents, squinting at it in the dim light. "Dude, check this out," he said, holding it up. It was a form titled Incident Report, Subject 8-12B, with a lot of it redacted. The parts we could read were vague, but one line stuck out. Containment breach resulted in 5 fatalities. Subject neutralized. Recommend full decommissioning of Sublevel 3. That's creepy, I muttered, glancing around. Probably just experiments gone wrong, Alex said, stuffing the paper into his backpack, like it was a souvenir. We should find that access tunnel they mentioned on the map. The tunnel. The access tunnel was exactly where the map said it would be. A small, reinforced door, hidden behind a stack of broken lockers. Unlike the front door, this one had a keypad, but it was smashed, wires hanging loose. Alex gave it a shove, and it creaked open, revealing a pitch-black staircase that led straight down. "Nope," I said immediately. "Nope, nope, nope." Alex laughed. "Come on, man. You've made it this far. Don't chicken out now." I stood there for a long moment, staring into the void. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to run back to the SUV and never look back. But Alex was already halfway down the stairs, his flashlight bobbing in the darkness. "Fine," I muttered, following him down. The tunnel was narrow, the walls lined with rusted pipes that groaned and creaked as we walked. The smell was worse down here, stronger, more chemical, mixed with something else I couldn't place, something organic. We passed by several side doors, all locked or jammed shut. The deeper we went, the colder it got. By the time we reached the bottom of the stairs, I could see my breath in the beam of my flashlight. That's when we heard it. A sound, faint, distant, like metal scraping against metal. Alex froze. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. We stood there, straining to listen. The sound came again, louder this time, followed by a soft, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps. But they didn't sound human. The tapping sound was faint at first, distant enough that I could convince myself it was just pipes settling or some old piece of machinery clunking around. But as we stood there, frozen in that dark, suffocating tunnel, it started getting closer, and it didn't sound like pipes. It was deliberate, rhythmic, a slow, measured tap, 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 like boots on concrete, echoing faintly off the walls. But there was something off about it. The intervals weren't even, like whoever, or whatever, was making the noise was limping or dragging something heavy behind them. Alex's flashlight beam wavered, as his hand shook. He wasn't smiling anymore. Probably just the wind, he said, his voice cracking slightly. In an underground bunker? I hissed back, gripping my flashlight so tight my knuckles went white. Alex, we should go. Seriously. Relax, he whispered, though he didn't sound convinced himself. It's probably an animal. Maybe a raccoon, or... Raccoons don't walk on two legs. Before Alex could respond, the sound stopped. Dead silence. Not the kind of silence you expect in a place like this, with its groaning pipes and creaking walls, but an oppressive, unnatural silence, like the air itself had been sucked out of the room. Even our breathing felt muted, swallowed by the darkness around us. Alex turned to me, his eyes wide. See? Whatever it was, it's gone. Let's keep moving. Keep moving, toward the creepy footsteps. My voice was louder than I intended, the echo bouncing down the corridor. Shh, Alex hissed, holding a finger to his lips. That's when we heard it again, louder this time, and much closer. Tap, tap, skrrk. That last sound wasn't footsteps. It was the unmistakable screech of metal scraping against concrete. My heart was hammering in my chest now, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run. But Alex, being Alex, started moving forward, his flashlight beam darting wildly as he searched for the source of the noise. Alex, stop! I grabbed his arm, yanking him back. We don't even know what's down there. That's why we're here, he shot back, his voice low but sharp. We came to explore. Remember, what's the point of turning back now? The point is not dying. Alex sighed, shaking his head like I was the one being unreasonable. Look, let's just check out sublevel 3. If it's too sketchy, we'll leave. I promise I wanted to argue, to drag him back to the SUV if I had to. But something about the way he looked at me, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement, made me hesitate. Against my better judgment, I nodded, and we kept moving. Sub-level 3. The air grew colder as we descended deeper into the facility. The map had shown 3 sub-levels in total, with sub-level 3 being the deepest. According to the notes, this was where most of the experimental research had taken place, whatever that meant. I couldn't stop thinking about the document Alex had found upstairs, the one about a containment breach and Subject 8-12B. What kind of experiments were they doing here? And what had gone wrong? The staircase ended in another narrow corridor, this one lined with thick, reinforced doors. Most of them were sealed shut, but one hung slightly ajar, its hinges rusted and warped. Alex pointed his flashlight at the door, then at me, grinning like we were kids about to sneak into a haunted house. You go first, he whispered, nudging me forward. I glared at him, but stepped through the doorway, my flashlight cutting through the thick darkness. The room was huge, much larger than I expected, with rows of what looked like glass containment chambers lining the walls. Most of them were shattered, jagged shards littering the floor. A few still stood intact, their interiors clouded with condensation and grime. Alex whistled low. What the hell is this place? Some kind of lab, I said, though it was obvious. The air was heavy, with the stench of chemicals, sharp and bitter, mixed with something else. Something I couldn't quite place, but made my stomach churn. We moved deeper into the room, stepping carefully over broken glass and bits of debris. My flashlight passed over one of the intact chambers, and I froze. There was something inside. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on me, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't. A figure was slumped in the corner of the chamber, barely visible through the foggy glass. It wasn't moving. "Alex," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "There's something in here." He was at my side in an instant, pressing his face to the glass. "Holy shit! Do you think it's—" Before he could finish, the figure twitched. Just a small movement, but enough to make my heart leap into my throat. "Nope," I said, backing away. "Nope, nope, nope." "Wait!" Alex grabbed my arm, his eyes wide. "It's probably dead, or like dormant or something. Let's get a closer look." "Are you insane? It just moved." "It could be mechanical," he said, as if that made it any better. He pulled out his phone, switching to video mode, and started filming as he crept closer to the chamber. I stayed where I was, my flashlight darting around the room, half expecting something to lunge at us from the shadows. Alex tapped on the glass with his flashlight. The figure didn't react. "See?" he whispered, turning to me with a smug grin. "It's just—" A loud clang echoed through the room, cutting him off mid-sentence. The sound wasn't coming from the chamber. It was coming from the hallway behind us. We both froze, turning toward the sound. My flashlight beam wavered as I scanned the doorway, but it was empty. "Probably the wind," Alex muttered, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Wind doesn't make that sound," I whispered, my throat dry. Before Alex could respond, the figure in the chamber slammed against the glass. The sound was deafening, a sharp crack that echoed through the room. I screamed, stumbling backward and nearly dropping my flashlight. Alex cursed, scrambling away from the chamber as the figure slammed into the glass again and again, the cracks spreading like spiderwebs. "We need to leave," I gasped, grabbing Alex's arm. "Wait, what if—" "No! Now!" Another clang echoed from the hallway, this time louder and accompanied by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and getting closer. Alex didn't argue this time. We bolted, sprinting back toward the staircase without looking back. The footsteps followed us, faster now, pounding against the concrete floor. My chest burned, my lungs screaming for air, but I didn't stop. When we reached the staircase, I glanced back. Something was in the doorway, a tall, shadowy figure, its features obscured by the darkness. It didn't chase us, just stood there, watching. I don't remember climbing the stairs. My legs were moving, but it was like I was on autopilot, my body propelled by pure adrenaline. Alex was just ahead of me, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls as he took the steps two at a time. The footsteps, those heavy, deliberate thuds, were still behind us, echoing through the stairwell. They weren't running, just pacing us, keeping time with our frantic escape. We finally burst out of the tunnel and into the central chamber where we'd started. My chest heaved as I doubled over, trying to catch my breath. Alex slammed the rusted door behind us, jamming a piece of broken rebar through the handle for good measure. "Do you think that'll hold?" I asked between gasps, my voice trembling. Alex didn't answer. He was too busy shining his flashlight back down the hallway, his face pale and covered in sweat. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The only sounds were our ragged breathing and the distant hum of the old, flickering lights. Then we heard it. Bang. It wasn't a loud bang, more like a muffled thud against the door we'd just come through. It was slow, almost methodical, like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side was testing it. My stomach churned as the banging continued, each impact sending a faint vibration through the floor beneath us. "We have to leave," I whispered. My voice barely carried over the pounding in my chest. "Yeah, Alex said, his voice shaky. Yeah, you're right. We grabbed our stuff, what little of it we'd brought, and made a beeline for the main entrance. The metal door was still ajar from when we'd forced it open earlier. As we approached, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The door wasn't just ajar. It was wide open. Didn't we close that? I asked, my voice rising in panic. Alex didn't answer. He just shook his head, shining his flashlight into the darkness outside. The beam revealed nothing but the barren desert stretching out in all directions, but somehow that didn't make me feel any better. If anything, the emptiness felt wrong, like it was hiding something just out of sight. We stepped outside, the cold night air hitting me like a slap to the face. The SUV was parked just a few yards away, but the moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. The driver's side door was open. Did you leave it like that? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. No, Alex said, his flashlight darting around nervously. I locked it. I'm sure I locked it. Then why? A sound cut me off. At first, I thought it was the wind, a faint rustling noise carried on the cold desert breeze. But as it grew louder, I realized it wasn't the wind at all. It was whispering. Low, garbled whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Alex and I froze, our flashlights scanning the area wildly. The whispers were impossible to pin down, shifting from one direction to another like they were circling us. I couldn't make out any words, if they were even words, but the tone was unmistakably wrong. It was urgent, insistent, like whatever was making the sound wanted us to listen. Get in the car, Alex said, his voice tight with fear. We didn't waste any time. Alex climbed into the driver's seat while I scrambled into the passenger side, slamming the door shut behind me. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice before finally jamming them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and Alex hit the gas, the tires kicking up a spray of dirt and gravel as we sped down the dirt path. I glanced back, half expecting to see something chasing us, but the entrance to the facility was empty. No shadowy figures, no glowing eyes, just the faint outline of the building, growing smaller in the distance. The road back. For the first few miles, neither of us spoke. The SUV bounced along the uneven dirt path. The only sounds the crunch of tires on gravel and the occasional rattle of loose equipment in the back. I kept glancing at the side mirrors, convinced I'd see something sprinting after us in the darkness. Finally, Alex broke the silence. What the hell was that? I didn't answer right away, partly because I didn't have an answer, but also because I wasn't sure I wanted to admit how scared I was. I don't know, I said finally, but I think it wanted us to leave. Leave? Alex scoffed, though his voice was still shaky. It chased us. That thing, whatever it wasn't just trying to scare us off. I didn't argue. He was right. Whatever we'd heard, or seen, wasn't just territorial. It was hunting us. The whispers hadn't stopped either. They'd faded into the background, barely audible over the rumble of the engine, but they were still there, just on the edge of hearing. I couldn't tell if they were real or if my mind was playing tricks on me, but every time I thought they were gone, they'd creep back, growing louder for just a moment before fading again. Alex must have heard them too, because he kept glancing at me, his face pale and drawn. Do you hear that? He asked, finally, gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. Yeah, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't say anything else, just pressed pressed harder on the gas. The lights. We were about 20 minutes from the highway when we saw the lights. At first, I thought it was another car coming toward us. Bright, blinding headlights cutting through the darkness. But as we got closer, I realized they weren't headlights at all. The lights were too high off the ground, too erratic, flickering in and out like someone was swinging a flashlight around wildly. "What the hell is that?" Alex muttered, slowing the SUV to a crawl. The lights grew closer, and as they did, I started to make out shapes, figures, moving in the darkness, their outlines barely visible against the faint glow. There were at least a dozen of them, standing in the middle of the road, their movements jerky and unnatural, like puppets on tangled strings. "Alex," I said, my voice trembling. "Don't stop." He didn't need to be told twice. The SUV roared forward, barreling toward the figures, but just as we were about to reach them, the lights vanished. The figures too were gone, leaving nothing but an empty stretch of dirt road. Alex swore under his breath, his hands gripping the wheel so tight I thought he might snap it in half. "Did you see them?" he asked, his voice tight with panic. I nodded. "Yeah, but where did they go?" "I don't know," he said. "I don't care. We're almost there. Just keep—" Before he could finish, the SUV jerked violently to the side, as if something had slammed into it. Alex fought to keep control, the tires skidding as we veered off the road and into the scrub. The engine sputtered and died, leaving us in total darkness. Neither of us moved for a long moment, too scared to even breathe. Then, slowly, I turned to Alex. "What the hell just happened?" He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the rearview mirror, his face pale as a sheet. "Don't look," he whispered. But of course, I looked. In the mirror, I saw them, the figures standing just behind the SUV, their faces, or what passed for faces, pressed against the glass. The figures were pressed against the glass of the back window, their faces distorted in ways that didn't make sense. Eyes too large, mouths stretched into unnatural shapes, their skin pale and almost translucent under the faint moonlight. I couldn't tell if they were human or if they had ever been. "Alex," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We need to move. Now." He didn't respond. His knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, frozen. I reached over and shook his shoulder hard. "Alex, snap out of it." Finally, he blinked, his eyes darting to me like he'd just woken up from a nightmare. Yeah, okay," he muttered, fumbling with the keys. The engine sputtered, coughing like it didn't want to start. "Come on," I thought desperately. "Hurry up, Alex." The figures didn't move. They just stood there, their hands pressed against the glass, their heads tilted at strange angles, watching us. One of them slowly dragged a bony finger down the window, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. My skin crawled. The engine roared to life, and Alex slammed on the gas. The SUV lurched forward, tires spinning in the loose dirt before catching traction. The figures didn't chase us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they didn't need to. They let us go, for now. The wrong turn. Alex sped down the dirt path, gripping the wheel so tightly I thought he might snap it in half. The whispers hadn't stopped. They were quieter now, just a faint hum in the back of my mind, but they were still there, persistent and relentless. "We're almost to the highway," Alex said, his voice shaking but determined. "Once we're on the main road, we're good. We just have to—" The SUV hit something, a hard bump that sent us both lurching forward. The headlights flickered, and for a second I thought the engine was going to die again. Alex swore, jerking the wheel to keep us steady. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my voice rising in panic. "I don't know," Alex snapped, his eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. "It doesn't matter. We just—" He cut off, slamming on the brakes so hard I nearly hit the dashboard. The SUV skidded to a stop, and I followed his gaze. The road was gone. We should have been at the highway by now, but instead, we were staring at an empty stretch of desert. No signs, no tracks, just endless sand stretching out in every direction. This isn't right," Alex stammered, his voice barely audible. "The road doesn't just disappear." He pulled out his phone, frantically tapping at the GPS app. The screen flickered, showing static for a moment, before displaying an error message. "Location not found." "What does that mean?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "How can it not find us? We're on a road." "Were," Alex corrected grimly. He turned off the app and restarted it, but the result was the same. Nothing. Just a blinking dot floating in a sea of grey. "It's like we're not even on the map." The whispers grew louder. The circle. I looked out the window, scanning the desert for any sign of where we were. The moon cast long shadows over the sand, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement, dark shapes shifting in the distance. My stomach churned as I realized they weren't stationary. They were coming closer. "Alex," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're not alone." He followed my gaze, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The shapes disappeared for a moment, only to reappear closer than before. "What the hell is going on?" Alex muttered, his voice tinged with panic. He slammed the SUV into reverse, spinning the wheel as he tried to turn us around. The tires kicked up a cloud of dust, and for a moment, we couldn't see anything. When the dust cleared, the road was back, but it wasn't the same road. It was narrower, overgrown with strange twisting vegetation that hadn't been there before. The headlights illuminated jagged rocks and gnarled trees, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. "This isn't right," Alex said again, more to himself than to me. "Just keep driving," I urged. "Whatever this is, we can't stay here." He didn't argue. The SUV crept forward, the headlights barely piercing the dense fog that seemed to have settled over everything. The shapes in the distance were still there, keeping pace with us, always just on the edge of the light. The return. After what felt like hours, the fog began to lift, and the terrain started to look familiar again. The overgrown vegetation gave way to barren desert, and in the distance, I saw the faint glow of headlights. Real headlights. Other cars. "We're back!" I exclaimed, relief flooding through me. "That's the highway!" Alex didn't respond. He was gripping the wheel so tightly his hands were shaking, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I didn't blame him. I felt the same way, like if we looked back, even for a second, we might see something we didn't want to. The SUV bounced back onto the paved road, and the sound of tires on asphalt was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. Alex didn't slow down until we were miles away, the facility and the dirt road far behind us. The aftermath. We didn't talk much on the drive home. What was there to say? We both knew we'd seen things we couldn't explain, things that didn't belong in this world. By the time we got back to Alex's apartment, it was almost sunrise. He parked the SUV and turned off the engine, sitting there in silence for a long moment. "You're not going to tell anyone, are you?" he asked finally, his voice quiet. "Would they even believe me?" I shot back. He nodded, staring out the windshield. "I'm deleting the map," he said after a moment. "The files, the videos, everything. This Whatever this was, it's not worth it. I didn't argue. Alex kept his word, wiping his laptop clean and smashing the USB drive that held the map. We never went back to the deep web after that. The dreams. It's been a month since that night, and I haven't been able to sleep properly since. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the whispers, faint but persistent, like they followed me back. I see those figures in my dreams, standing in the darkness, their faces pressed against the glass. I don't know what we stumbled into that night, and I don't want to know. All I know is this: not everything abandoned is meant to be found. Some doors should stay closed, some maps should stay lost, and some places aren't empty